Good morning, everybody. Welcome to class this morning. Before we get started here, just a couple of announcements. I will be grading your midterms here probably today. I'll be finishing grading those. So be on the lookout for that if you have any questions about that. Also, our IT Advising Day was yesterday. So I recommend that, any of you who, will be finishing up in the spring or, will be continuing to take classes in the spring, if you'll contact whoever is over your program area, I believe that's Miss Randall, to kind of help you figure out what you need next and your next steps, just to make sure that you are all on the same page, then that would be ideal. And after 2 weeks of not streaming, we had a little fall break, and then we had a little midterm week where we had a little drop by question and answer session instead of our regular live stream. We are back at it, which means we have kind of gone over the hump in the course, right? Like we are on the downhill slope for the remainder of the semester. So what we want to do is we just kind of want to make sure that we are continuing and we're going to be finishing strong. So just keep that in mind as we are, rounding things out here. We got a couple more weeks in October. And then we've got November and like a week in December and we're done, right? So we are, we're almost there. So keep that head up. Today we're moving on to Module 7. Which is about writing for end users. And this is one of the things that a lot of people don't really consider when we think about like what we need to do to make sure that our end users have all of the tools that they need to be able to support themselves after they receive support from us. One of the things that we were talking about the last time, if you can remember back that far, is the idea of education, right? And how we educate an end user. And, with the idea being that, if they have a problem, while it is great that, that they might be continually giving us business, one of the better ways for customer satisfaction is to set up our customers for success, set up our clients for success with education. Right? And so one of the ways that we do that is through writing instructions and writing manuals and writing these sorts of training guides, so that our users can follow them and help themselves, right? Because, our users might not always have the time to do, our users might not always have the time to make a visit, to come to our center to get some help, or they might not want to. It might be an inconvenience to them, but having some kind of written guide is going to help them quite a lot. And when we're talking about working with some kind of written guide, at its core, what we're talking about is essentially technical writing. And technical writing is really its own skill. Right? Because like a lot of us, we think about writing in terms of like English class, right? Like that's the exposure that the majority of us have had to writing, is taking some kind of English composition class where you've written different types of essays, argumentative essays, all that kind of stuff. But technical writing is really its own discipline and its own type of writing. And even if you're not that great at your English compositional writings, you can still be really, really good at technical writing, just because it's an entirely different skill. When we're talking about technical writing, we're talking about documentation, which is written communication to provide information to end users or coworkers. Right, so that's one of the big things that we're thinking about there. This is our definition for what we're talking about when we say documentation. It's written communication to provide information to end users or coworkers. So we've got the what, we've got the why, we've got the who right here. What is this? This is written communication. So it's things that have been written down. We can write things down, as we'll talk about. We can write things down online. We can write things down and print it out and put it on, have it on paper. We can have various forms of how we write things down. The format doesn't matter, just so long as it's written. The next is the why, or the purpose here, and the purpose is to provide information. Right, so one of the things that you might be used to in English composition is storytelling, and like putting a personal spin on things and adding extra information into your writing. That's not the point here. Right, when you do all of that, as we'll discuss further, that just adds noise in the way of providing that information, of getting our user from that problem state that we've talked about previously to that goal state. And this could be for our end users or even for our coworkers, the people that work with us, right? Because when we, we talked about back in the management module, we talked a little bit about making trainings for internal trainings, right? And how internal trainings are different from external trainings, right? So when you're doing an external training, you want to assume no knowledge. Internal trainings, we can assume a little bit of knowledge because they have a job there, they work with us, we have some familiarity with them. And really it's the same thing here for our technical writing. When we are writing for our end users, which we'll discuss in detail, we're assuming no previous knowledge. But when we're writing for our coworkers, we're talking about different things like knowledge guides, right? Like our knowledge bases that we have in our help desk management system or our ticketing system. Right, so there is sort of this baseline understanding of, well, what exactly is needed to be known here, and how we can build off the top of that, right? So we get a little bit more leeway in how much we have to include for our end users versus our coworkers, right? And so the big goal here is to produce documents that effectively and efficiently communicate information that readers need, right? And there are those two words again. Effective and efficient. Doing things right and doing the right things. These are terms that we've said over and over and over again throughout the semester, right? And in most classes, there's like some kind of through line that gets you from the beginning of the class to the end of the class. And in this class, it's really the concepts of efficiency and effectiveness and how we apply them to different aspects of computer user support. So when we're talking about effectiveness in this, we're talking about readers getting the right information. So we want readers to get our correct information to master a topic or perform a task. Right? Now that's key, and that's something that we'll be discussing further as well. Right? The idea of topic mastery or task performance. Right? Based on what you write as your technical writing, your users should be able to master that topic or perform that task solely based on your writing. They should not need any other guidance as they're doing that, right? So as we're approaching writing from a technical writing perspective, that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with, is we're dealing with this idea of, upon reading this, I should be able to do the thing, or I should know the thing that the paper wants me to be able to know to do. And really, when we have good technical writing that trims away all that excess of, flowery language and storytelling, and just gets to the point and communicates things effectively to where our readers get correct information to master a topic or perform a task, and efficiently, where our readers do not have to waste time searching for information there. It's just all kind of laid out there for them. When we have this good technical writing like that, that's going to save our users time. They don't have to, get in their car and drive to the help desk, or they don't have to make a call and sit on the phone. They can just get these instructions, get this documentation, read through it, walk through the steps, and they'll be able to perform their task or master their topic by the end of the writing. So what exactly is technical writing, right? Like we've kind of danced around the concept of technical writing now. What exactly is technical writing? Let's define that term. When we're talking about technical writing, what we're talking about here is workplace writing. So when we are talking about technical in this sort of way, we're not necessarily talking about technology, right? Like that's one thing that people kind of do from time to time, is they conflate the ideas of technical and technology. But when we're talking about technical here, we're just talking about knowledge that is not widespread. We're talking about knowledge that is kind of isolated to the territory of experts and specialists. Subject matter experts, the people who know what they're talking about. So if you're a banker, you can write about, you can do technical documents about banking. If you're an accountant, you can do technical documents about accounting, or taxes, or whatever your mastery is, right? If you're a doctor or a nurse, you can do technical writing about, healthcare. And if you are an IT professional in computer training and support, you can do technical writing regarding information technology. Now, we see that it's in the territory of experts and specialists. Now, who's the expert? Who's the specialist? That's you. Right? Just on the basis of working in a career or studying a field, you have gained a level of expertise. So whatever you decide to become, you become a specialist in that particular area, just through gained experience and gained knowledge working on the job. Right? Like if you're a mechanic, you can write a document about how to, change a tire, or how to change the oil, or how to change a spark plug, right? And if you're an IT technician, you can write a document about, how to replace a hard drive, how to install and run antivirus software, all of these things. So your level of schooling or your years of experience is not what really makes you an expert, right? Just the fact that you are in that area and working in that area makes you a specialist. Now, as you grow and as you learn more and as you get more formal education, your area of expertise expands. Right? Your area of expertise might start out a little limited, and then as you grow and learn more, it'll expand. But you do have knowledge in those areas. You do have an expertise, a specialty in those areas. And so the goal should always be to expand your areas of expertise so you can accommodate more in terms of your technical writing. You can become a specialist in more areas. But whatever you decide to become, you become a specialist in that area. Now, when we're talking about technical writing, there are certain characteristics to technical writing. We've already mentioned some of these. Right? And the first thing here is we're talking about an economical writing style. And in this case here, we're not talking about like money, right? Like normally when you think about economy and being economical, you're thinking about money. But we're not thinking about money here. We're thinking about, we're thinking about words. Right? So when we are writing economically, we want to save our words. Just like when we are being economical with our money, we want to save our money and we want to put as much money away as possible. Right? So if we want to be economical with our words, we want to say what we need to say in the fewest amount of words possible. And that's really a big goal of technical writing. Right? Because remember, back the goal, we want our user to be able to get the information they need efficiently and effectively. And so if I have to kind of skim through a bunch of words to get to the information that I need, it's not very efficient. It's not very effective. Two is that it begins with the most important information first. And so this is pretty vital, right? Like what we want to do is we want to set up our users for success as they read a document. So one of the things that I like to include first would be like maybe a list of parts or a list of software that you might need to complete your task. That would be one thing that that you would want people to know right up front, so they could gather things together before they got too deep into what they were doing. And then, having to go find something else or go download something else in the process, right? And so as they're kind of progressing through, it just kind of takes longer and longer and more time because they're finding out new things that they need as they progress. So a list of things that people need right off the bat is one of the things that I like to highlight as being one of these most important things. And among that could be like knowledge, right? Because we can't include all the world's knowledge in a singular technical documentation. So a certain technical documentation might have to assume some previous knowledge. And so if you have to assume some previous knowledge, another one of the things that you might put up front is, this document assumes that you have knowledge of this. If you need more information about this, go and get this other technical documentation. Right? And another, probably the biggest thing that we want to have first is what problem are we solving with this technical documentation? What is the goal state that is met by this documentation? That way I can just read that first and know if I need to waste my time with the rest of the document or not. Because then I'll know if it'll solve my problem or not. But we also want to communicate information that's vital to the reader's productivity. Right? We want to make sure that the reader is able to do all the tasks in the way that they can do them. So we want to make sure that it's as productive as possible. And our formatting and our layout can help us do that by providing this information up front. We want to use styles and formats that help readers understand a sequence of events and document organization. And so, one of the best things to do, is use numbers and bullet points in your technical documentation. Right? Because if I have something laid out that's very clear that this is step 1, this is step 2, this is step 3, this is step 4, and so on and so forth, right, then it's going to be a lot easier on me to be able to perform this task. Right? So we'll use numbered lists. Right? Think about instruction manuals that you've used, because an instruction manual is a type of technical writing. Yes, so if an instruction manual is a type of technical writing, basically all the instruction manuals are written to that end. So it is pretty interesting to, think about, when you look at that, you see these, you see it numbered, 1 to whatever. You see the graphics, right, that kind of help you put things together. Right, so there's more visual there. than there is words. And that's going to help out people a lot. It's concise, but not cryptic. Which is kind of important here. We want something that's concise, but we want something that is not cryptic. So we said we want to use an economical writing style, but in using an economical writing style, we don't want to keep out too many words. Right? We want to be concise, but sort of within reason, right? Because when we get cryptic here, then it's just confusing. And we can omit words to the point of confusion. Where we include pointers and we include cross references. In this case, if we're talking about digital or virtual documentation, we're talking about links to other documentation where if you need more help with something else, we'll help you over there. And again, we're going to focus on information, right? Because that's what our users are needing with this, and not entertainment. Because this is not supposed to be, reading for enjoyment. This is supposed to be reading for problem solving. So as we're looking at this, we see some strategies here as to how we can implement those best practices. The first is use short, simple, declarative sentences, phrases, and lists. Right? Lists are great as far as formatting goes for documentation. Everything is nice and neatly organized. Everything's all on a line. The kind of... lost my word here. It's too early in the morning. The kind of the usage of lists lends itself toward the idea of brevity, right? So using a list can be a great way to kind of focus your technical writing. We describe a sequence of steps in the order that's performed. We include those links to where readers can find more information about other topics. And we can use format elements to help users understand the organization of information. Right, and so when we're talking about format elements here, we're talking really about design elements, things like alignment, things like proximity, things like contrast, to separate different topics or transition between topics. So when we're using these format elements, it really helps us organize information, helps us to kind of get this idea of what we're doing. And it allows our user to more clearly be able to kind of read the things that are going on there. Now, with that being said, we do have a few things that we want to avoid here. Right, so we want to avoid run-on sentences, we want to avoid humor, and we want to avoid calling attention to the writer's personality or style. Right, so all three of these get back to that idea of the economy of words here, using the fewest amount of words possible, while at the same time, the final two, humor and calling attention to the writer's personality or style, that lends itself to that obfuscation of the point, right? Like if we are cloudying muddying the waters here, so to speak, then it's going to cause some issues for our user to be able to get the information that they need. Now, one of the big things that we might want to do as we're approaching this is to plan our document. Right before we start writing, we kind of need to plan our document, and this kind of gets back to some of the stuff that we were talking about in Module 1, all the way back when. Right, so we want to look at who is the target audience. What does this target audience already know? What does the audience need to know? What do you want the audience to be able to do when they finish reading the document? And what medium will be used to transmit the document to its audience? Now, in these 5 questions here that we're asking as we're getting ready to write our document, there is one word that jumps out, and it's probably the one word that you've noticed as well as you watch this that's jumped out to you, and that's the idea of audience. Right? We want to know who that audience is. We want to know what they already know. We want to know what they need to know. Right? We're getting back to that idea of being, client-centered, client-focused. What does your audience need to be able to do when they finish reading the document? What medium will be used to transmit the document to its audience? Audience is at the core here, so the audience is important. As we're providing this technical communication is the delivery of technical information to readers or listeners or viewers in a manner that is adapted to their needs. And we're talking, and in that way, we're talking about the level of understanding, their background, what their goals are, all that sort of stuff. So you, as the technical writer, are challenged to write about something that's highly technical, something that you have an expertise in because you've been on the job in that field, and you've been working around that for an extended period of time. So you've gained this knowledge, you've gained this expertise, and now you're getting this challenge to write about something highly technical in a way that a beginner can understand. So how can we do this? I'd like to propose something to you. And it's the Feynman technique. Richard Feynman, education and psychology professor from, I want to say UCLA. Can't quite remember right off the top of my head. I do believe it was California at least. Adopted this idea of the Feynman technique in terms of how we can teach a new concept to anyone. Right? And it really does this teacher as a learner model. And really in a couple of these modules, in this one and in a future module where we talk about training, a lot of what we're kind of looking at is just a little bit of like education theory and things like that, things of that nature. Right, so this course brings in all sorts of different stuff from all sorts of different disciplines to help you provide customer support. And we're looking at this as a teacher as a learner model. Right, so one of the things here is that as you're teaching the concepts, you're also understanding more about the concepts and how they need to be presented to other people to get them to understand them. Right, so we have this sort of methodology here that we can utilize. And the first thing that we want to do is choose a concept. So when we're writing technical documentation, that's going to be pretty easy, because the concept's going to kind of be chosen for us, right? Like there's going to be an identified need due to a knowledge gap somewhere. And so we're going to need some technical documentation to communicate to our users the information that they need. So the concept's an easy choice. But then we want to, and it says here, teach it to a toddler, right? We say teach it to a toddler, but in this case, we're talking about like, teach it to, an alien that just came down from Earth, or just came down to Earth, or teach it to a dog, right? Like teach it to something that has no concept of anything that you're talking about. right? And we even have to consider like the language that we use as well, because that's one of the reasons why why I like to say alien. Teach it like you're teaching it to an alien. Because especially when we're using a lot of technology terms, oftentimes, we see those technology terms and they're like a foreign language. And so we have to kind of be able to translate those to our end users so that they can understand what we're talking about and help solve the problem. Right? So we can kind of forget what we're doing there. And so in teaching this topic, whatever it may be, this concept, whatever it may be, to this entity that lacks any background knowledge, from there we want to identify any gaps in the material and go back to the original source material to try to like brush up your own knowledge on that and help fill in those gaps. Go use other documentation, look at other people's technical writing and see where they have kind of filled in things where you haven't. Right? And this is one of the places where I like to do the discussion board topic that I have for you for this module, which is looking at the everyday tasks and trying to explain them and do them step by step. And some of those I've seen done in person before. Like the peanut butter and jelly sandwich one is a really fun one to watch in person. Because you see like the instructor or the workshop leader, or whoever it is that's doing it, they have all the equipment there, and then they try to make the sandwich in the way that the instructions describe. That whoever is giving them instructions, that exactly the way that they describe it. Right? Because when you think about it, like that's the way that someone who has no background knowledge of the concept would interpret it, is exactly the way you describe it, or exactly the way you walk through it. Right? So that's kind of important to remember. Right? So when they're ripping open bread bags and they're just taking whole jars of peanut butter and just kind of rubbing them on the bread and smashing things together and doing all this kind of stuff. We get this idea, and it's a really like it's overblown to like the point of caricature, but that's only because like making a sandwich is something that we're all familiar with. When it gets into these areas of less familiarity, these areas of our expertise, making sure we describe these topics in a way that anyone who has never had any background knowledge can understand it is critical. It's super important. And then as we kind of fill in these gaps, we want to review it. We want to go back through it. We want to read it again, and we want to simplify it if we can, right? We want to make those, we want to make those words economical. Right? So I've got a quote here from Mortimer Adler, who said, "The person who says he knows what he thinks, but he cannot express it, usually does not know what he thinks." Right? So this kind of gets to the core of the matter when it comes to the idea of writing technical documentation. You know what to do. You can do it. You can do it 100 times. You've done it 100 times. But when you think about what you're doing, you get this question of yourself, like, well, do I? Do I really know how to do this? Or is it just one of those things? Like, why do I do this? Why do I do that? What is this? Right? If you think you know, but you can't express it, you can't explain it, Do you know? If you can replace a hard drive, but you can't explain to someone else how to replace a hard drive, can you replace a hard drive? Something to think about. And again, it all kind of comes back to this idea of being customer-centric, of being user-centric, and we want to help our reader, right? We're targeting in general, we kind of want to target our reading level at the 10th to 12th grade. There are differing schools of thought on this, right? There are some people that say 9th grade, some people that say 10th, 11th, 12th, right? The majority for technical documentation is somewhere in high school with your technical documentation in terms of reading level. When you think about like newspapers, for example, as kind of a baseline, newspapers are generally written at a 6th grade reading level, just because they're kind of written for the masses who have different experiences. And nowadays, most word processors like Microsoft Word, they include a readability index. There are also tools online where you can get a readability index, things like the Hemingway app, where you can put your writing in there and see, kind of what reading level grade it gets. Tell the readers who the intended audience is. That's a good one. Who is this for? And that's another one of those things that we can have right up front there as well. Who is this for? Is it for me? Right? Because then I can immediately see, well, this is for me or this is not for me. And I know whether I can waste my time with it or not. Now, one of the things that we could also do, if we kind of span some different user gaps here, maybe some more experienced users and some lesser experienced users, is that we can organize our document so that experienced users can skip basic materials. And I mean, that's just as easy like, if you already know how to do XYZ, go to step 5. That's all you got to do. And then all of a sudden, the more advanced users can skip to step 5 and keep going. But the beginner users, the novice users, can keep reading from where they're at to get the instructions that they need. So this helps us to make this documentation accommodable for different types of users. State the document's purpose up front. If we can state the document's purpose up front in a few sentences, along with telling the reader who the intended audience is, then that's going to immediately let me know that if I need to read this or not. Tell readers which tasks they can perform after completing the document. What are the goals of this document? So those are 3 big things right there, right? Who's the audience? What's the purpose? What should you be able to do at the end? What are your objectives? Right, and then we're going to tailor the document to the media. And printed media can generally be longer, right? Because, you kind of have to have everything printed out and available to them. Right? They don't necessarily, they can't necessarily go back and forth and get other documents. But online, we can write shorter documents and use pointers to direct them to other documents if they need help with different things. So we can kind of tailor how we write to the media in which we're writing on. And I think in general, we kind of consider writing to be text-based, either online or, printed on paper. But there are a lot of other types of documents that we consider to be technical documents that you might not even think about. Things like videos. Right? These are just some printed and text-based documents here. But in addition to these things, videos also count. Right? And, I was reading a statistic earlier that says 80% of people go to YouTube when they're trying to learn something for the first time. Right? Remember, that's one of the reasons why I have these live streams on YouTube, is because that's where a lot of people are already at when they're trying to learn new things, is YouTube. So we're able to get that information there. Audio, like podcasts, things of that nature. They also can count in terms of technical documentation. A lot of people, prefer video methodology these days. Audio methodologies, could be kind of weird in general for technical documentation, but it is possible for certain applications. I think we're getting to a point where we can kind of wrap up for the day. I do want to talk briefly about the principles of design for documentation. And, these are our principles of design in general. And using these principles help us to kind of format our document more clearly so that we can create a better understanding of kind of the way our information is laid out. And we call them our CRAP principles, or our contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity, CRAP acronym. Right? And for contrast, right, we use contrast to show differences. Right? So if we see like a document transition, you might see a heading that is a different font, or a different font size, or a different font weight. And this shows you that we're going from one section into another section, right? Like if you had your document headings be the exact same type of font in font face, in size, in weight as the rest of your documentation, your user wouldn't be able to find where one section ends and another section begins. It would all just kind of run together, right? So we use contrast to call out differences and let our user know kind of where things are going. Repetition, on the other hand, gives us cohesiveness. And so whereas contrast shows differences, repetition shows sameness. So we're establishing a visual style for each particular element so that when I know when I look at that element, I'm looking at something that's related to these other elements that look the same. Alignment. Every element is connected visually. So we align everything to a certain like grid line, or just make sure everything is left aligned there. And then proximity. If things are like one another, we put them close to one another. If things are different, we put them farther apart from one another. These are the kind of the nutshell versions of all of these concepts. And I believe I put more about them in the module, so you can read more about them as you're going through the module material. But that does bring me to the end of what I have for you for your live stream today. We'll turn the music back on and just hang out in the chat for a couple minutes just in case anybody has any questions. If you're watching this later and you have some questions, please contact me. But that's all that I have for you for this week. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.